kind of rhetorical question that I ask is, are we not kind of alarmist here? Is it really as serious as we're saying it is? And the reason for that is that this problem goes back many years. I started doing this before Dick and David did, but it was on a much more casual and much less detailed kind of basis. But we've been talking about a structural deficit for at least 20 or 25 years. We've been talking about pension problems, all kinds of things that the state faces that they're not handling very well. And the question arises, well, if we've gotten through the last 20 to 25 years with these problems, what's different now? Why can't we just sort of go along the way we've been going? I call it a kind of muddle through strategy. May not be great, but why is action really necessary? So the first thing is that repeating just what the same information that was just talked about, we do have this long-term projected deficit that we have to deal with, but that's not new. We've had these kind of things in the past. And so the first answer is a fairly obvious one. We are not the federal government. The federal government has run deficits almost every year except like 1969 and around the year 2000. But all the other years we've had huge deficits. The debt's been growing more rapidly recent years and so on. So why are we different? Well, the main reason we're different is that we're a state government. We have limited powers. We don't have monetary powers, things of that sort. So our deficits have to be dealt with in a more direct, more kind of immediate way than the federal government. The federal government still has its long-term fiscal problems. They're not going to go away, but they do have some more things they could do than we do. A second answer is, why don't we simply just wait and we'll grow ourselves out of the problem? This was the Edgar strategy in the early 1990s. He came into office with some severe fiscal problems, deficits, things of that sort. What he did was impart a little bit of austerity, slow growth of government programs, and the economy took off. And in kind of an unusual situation in the late 90s, we actually had surpluses in the state of Illinois. So why can't we wait for that to happen again? Well, two reasons. One is we're in a much deeper hole than we were back in those days. And secondly, there's very little prospect, at least in most economists' mind, that we're going to have a kind of really rapid growth of what we had in the mid to late 1990s. So growing ourselves out of this is probably not a very viable option. Another kind of response might be, well, we've raised taxes for a few years. We've cleaned up some of our debts. We've had pension reform. Haven't we taken care of our problems? Why can't we just go back to a normal situation? Well, unfortunately, the pension reform falls far short of dealing with the long-term pension problem. And secondly, even with the tax increase the last 2 or 3 years, we still have huge backlog of unpaid bills, and when that goes away, the problem is going to be much greater. Now, one thing I should say here, I don't think we're advocating necessarily simply continuing the higher tax the way we have it now. We do need continuing revenue sources, but those revenue sources could be different from what we have now. So we're not saying keep the tax increase exactly the way it is, but we do need inflow of revenue. And so the next question is, well, how did we manage all these years when we're running deficits and we're still at least barely solvent, even though our credit rating is low? We can still borrow money at 0.5% or so, or maybe 1% more than other states. So people are still willing to lend us money. So why can't we just do the same kind of things we've done for these many years? Why do we have to take more drastic action? And the answer is that most of the ways we dealt with these problems were what I'd call temporary expedients. They work for a short time, but in most cases they actually tend to make things worse over the long term. So as you can see that with the slide now, one way of responding is simply don't pay your bills on time. And the state of Illinois has done that and done that year after year. We have a backlog of bills, so any one year you can, in a sense, balance your budget by not paying all of your bills, but then next year those bills are still there, plus the new bills, so it actually makes the hole deeper. So getting through one year does not necessarily make it better. It actually makes it worse for future years. Another way of doing things is to try to find ways to speed up revenue collections, collect your revenue more quickly. But again, like a tax amnesty would be an example of that, where you say we'll give taxpayers a month or two, and if you pay your taxes that are owed that you haven't paid, we'll not penalize you. Well, that brings a lot of money, but that money would have probably come in eventually, and you can only have an amnesty every 5-10 years, maybe not even that often. So again, an amnesty or other speed-up mechanisms help you in the short run. They don't really help you in the long run. The next one is pretty obvious. Borrowing for current operations is simply not a very good idea. Again, it gets you through the year, but next year you have the same spending obligations, but you also have the obligation of paying back the short-term borrowing. So we've done that very often, and now we're in a situation where we're paying a fairly huge penalty for not paying tax refunds on time, things of that sort, because we haven't got the resources to do that. Another long-term problem that's been around for almost forever in the state of Illinois is what I listed here as pension holidays. Now, a pension holiday, it would be somebody not funding pensions for a year. Now, we haven't taken, in most cases, full-fledged pension holidays, but we have cut back on our pension funding, underfunding pensions at various times. And as everyone knows, that has caught up with us. Our pension problem in Illinois is not so much that, again, we have lavish benefits and abuse and things of that sort. There obviously are examples of abuse, but the main problem is that we didn't put the money in that we knew we had to when it was due. So an example, the General Assembly, the governor would say, well, we don't have as much resources we'd like this year. What do we do? Do we raise taxes? That's not a very popular thing. Do we cut back programs? That's not very popular. Why not simply not put as much in the pension fund this year? No one's going to be a big deal. We'll make it up later, and we'll just go along in that kind of way without much distress. Well, again, that works for 1 year or 2 years, but it doesn't work forever. And my example is that $100 million of underpayment back in 1980 now is $1 billion of shortfall because of the lack of the initial payment plus the lack of growth of the funds during that period of time. Another option is selling or leasing of assets. You could, for example, sell or lease the lottery. The Chicago tollway. The tollway could be sold, a whole variety of things. And again, that's not necessarily a bad idea, but the problem is once you sell an asset, that asset is gone. You have the money, but you don't have the future income. So, for example, if we lease the lottery, you might get a huge amount of money right now, but then in the future, the money coming in for the lottery would go to the private owner or the private leasee, not necessarily to the state. And the other problem illustrated by the city of Chicago is that often there's not a lot of discipline involved here. The idea was when Chicago sold the Skyway, and when they sold the parking meter business, that they were going to take in this money and then use it over a period of time. But what they did was use it almost immediately, and now they're in a situation where they spent most of the proceeds of the asset sales, and they no longer have the flow of income coming in that they had in the past. So that again is not a very good long-term kind of solution. And not the final, but the final one we'll talk about here is that, as David mentioned and Dick will mention briefly, the state has many different sources of revenue, and we have a kind of archaic system where we have different funds. And the general fund is a kind of combination of funds that we usually think about. So if the state is short in one fund, they may have the option of draining down another fund to make up that shortfall. And again, it's not a good idea for two reasons. One is once you drain the fund, it's not there any longer, and you can't do it next year. So the hole reappears next year. And the funds that were taken out of the road fund, for example, if they go to someplace else, then can't be used to repair the road. So again, these are all kind of what I call expedients. They're not long-term kind of solutions. So again, we're in a bad but not catastrophic situation, but I don't think this can go on forever. So in terms of the toolbox, I started out with a quotation from Ernest Hemingway from The Sun Also Rises, and two people were talking to one another. One person had gone bankrupt, even though he seemed to be a pretty prosperous person, and the question was, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer was two ways, gradually at first and then suddenly. Well, we're in the gradually phase right now, and we can in fact move in some other directions, but again, gradually has a way of turning into a suddenly situation. And our example obviously is Detroit, which is we're not saying Illinois is headed for Detroit's fate, but those kind of things can happen, and they can happen pretty suddenly. So doing nothing is really not a very viable long-term kind of option.